All right. Ron, welcome to our call. Rexers, welcome. I'm really excited to see everybody. We are talking today about persevering in the midst of becoming a recognized expert. It is not always an easy process. One of the things that we say up front in the course of the Rex journey is that this is definitely not an overnight thing. The steps that you're taking, maybe there's a lightning strike and maybe you see an immediate return, but honestly, that is almost never the case. The fundamental reason why some people are successful along the recognized expert journey and many, many other people are not is, it's just some basic stuff, but it's about commitment and perseverance, because you don't see those immediate results. And just like anything else, whether it's putting money in your 401k or going to the gym or something like that, there is a big difference between the people who have enough confidence and faith in the process and self-efficacy to keep doing the thing that they know that they need to do. A lot of people fall off because there's not an urgency, or they get discouraged or something like that. But it makes a tremendous difference. There's a compound benefit that comes from doing these activities over time. And Ron and I have been working together for over 3 years now. And Ron is somebody that I really respect, and I'm so excited that you guys are going to get to hear from today, because he is someone that has never been afraid to put in the work. He has now written, between his Forbes articles and his Harvard Business Review articles, and he's gotten started on both of these in the past 3 years. He's written over 110 pieces for Forbes and Harvard Business Review. He's built a tremendous body of work and a tremendous brand for himself. I'm so proud of him and just his progress since we first started working together. Ron, he's a modest guy, so he probably won't tell you all this stuff. So I just want to say it up front. He has given not one but 2 TEDx talks. He's delivered an Authors at Google talk, and he's a multiple time author as well. So he is somebody who has really put in a huge amount of effort in building his brand and his platform and getting his ideas heard. And so I'm really excited to have him share his perspective, because there have definitely been ups and downs along the way. This is not a hockey stick like they have on all the startup charts. Sometimes there's successes and sometimes there's setbacks, but Ron has really become a student of it. So Ron, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here and good to see all your faces. And I've so much enjoyed our Facebook group discussions and seeing your successes and all of your wins and cheering you on from afar. So it's great to be with y'all.
Awesome. Well, Ron, let me get started with just a few questions. I want to kind of kick it off. Some people from the Recognized Expert community either emailed me questions or put questions on our Facebook group, and I want to make sure to get to those. I appreciate people seeding that. But my plan is that I'll ask you guys, I'll ask you a few questions up front, kind of get the ball rolling, and then Rexers who are on the call, please feel free to, at any point, type your questions into the chat box. I'm monitoring that, and then we'll intersperse those with the questions that have come in earlier. But so Ron, my first question for you, maybe just to kind of kick us off, can you take us back to 2014, 2015, when you were thinking about starting your recognized expert journey? What was that like? How did you come to decide that this was something that would be important for you to do?
So this is where we pour the wine now? No.
It can be. It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Whatever your favorite beverage is. I had written my 8th book, and I was getting all kinds of great accolades for it. And I still, maybe it was my career stage, or I still deludedly thought that if you write it, they will come, was how it worked. And I hired a publicist, and we put all kinds of money into the marketing of the book, and got all kinds of great reviews and tweets about it. But after that much work, I still felt like this just doesn't, something's wrong here.
How much money did you put into the publicist, just out of curiosity?
It was obscene. It was obscene.
Yeah.
I can't get those body parts back now. uh,
They can be very pricey and sometimes very disappointing.
She got us some great hits. She got us a lot of good radio interviews, a great piece in Fortune magazine by Patty Sellers, So it got some good hits. Our money we spent in the marketing with the publisher was a far better return in terms of airport promotions and a bunch of other stuff. But I was still flying blind. And so, at a moment, and at the same time, my firm was also not keeping up with the literally tens of thousands of people entering the playing field doing what we do. Didn't matter if we've done it better and longer than others. We were being compared to really far inferior consultancies, and we're confused by that. And our network, mostly our business was through referrals and CEOs who'd move on and take us with them. But I could see on the horizon, this was not sustainable. And it was depressing. It was really discouraging. And I thought, maybe my ideas aren't that good. Maybe I'm just not that bright, or it's an ageism thing. They think I'm too old, or they want the 28-year-old hipster-looking person who can quote something from 40 years ago and make it sound cool. So you just go into this all kinds of self-degrading conclusions around why your ideas aren't being adopted to the degree you think they should be, when you see them having the impact they are, right? So you can't reconcile, here's what people are saying about the content of my material. Here's what's not happening with that material. I can't make that make sense. So one night in probably 2 a.m, was stalking on LinkedIn, and I had been stalking you for a couple of weeks. I listened to your TED Talk, and Len Schlesinger's endorsement of you, Dorie Clark is the thought leader of thought leaders. Given I know Len and I know his work, and thought, well, that's an endorsement. So, but then you caught me. You caught me stalking you. We all have those LinkedIn premiums where you can tell who's looking. And you popped in and said, "Hey, Ron, how can I help?" I'm like, oh crap, she caught me. And so I think I said something really obtuse to you, like, I think I may have a client for you.
You did. I think I may have a client for you. And then we hopped on the call and you're like, surprise, it's me.
So that's how it began. And began in a sense of irreconcilable differences among the realities I was facing, and not having any clue what to do about that. And not even sure if there was anything to do, fully expecting you to say, something like, yeah, I appreciate your willingness to do this, but you're not really the material that I think has much to offer, or it's past your time, or nobody wants to hear about that anymore, whatever, some dismissive thing. In fact, I think when you offered to send me a proposal, I think I said, can we just do the diagnostic part first in case we find out that I'm not helpable? We don't have to commit to 6 months of torture.
Yeah. So you're at kind of a low point. And so when we first started working together, Ron, when we were first connecting and having these conversations, and you were first starting to kind of wrap your head around the process of, what I was suggesting, what was that like for you? I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about those early moments, like how did you receive it?
You brilliantly only give me breadcrumbs, right? You didn't lay out a big plan, because I would have surely run from you at that point. In our first 8 months, the number of times I used either I gave you the face or I actually said the words, "Are you out of your mind? Have you lost your mind?" When you suggest, and the number of times you had to say, "Just do it, just do it." Well, I can't count those. And so I'm lost. I don't know what to do. I think the pivotal moment for me is when you sent the diagnostic report. You sent here's my diagnosis. And I got the report. It was a Sunday afternoon. My hands started to sweat. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what it's like to be on the other side of me. This is what I do to people. I hope it doesn't feel this bad. And then you're anxious, and you start reading the report. And I remember I cried. I was literally like in tears thinking, this hurts, but it's true. And one of the things,
I wasn't mean.
No, she was painfully and beautifully accurate. But very kind about it, and very promising. But one of the things when we do our diagnostic reports for executives, we give them 2 different versions of it. We give them, here's the data, here's what the story says, and then we give them here's my take on your story. what I think your data is saying. And so when Dorie sent her report, it was the data. It was full of practical perspectives and observations and interesting thoughts. And it pinched because I'm like, oh, that's true. And the reality was, I began to realize, oh my gosh, the reason I didn't know what to do was because I was in the wrong galaxy. It wasn't that the things I were trying to do, like a publicist, were slightly inaccurate or slightly, not well thought through. They weren't even near where I needed to be. So I wrote back to her Sunday afternoon. I think we had a debrief call scheduled for Monday or Tuesday. I said, this is great. It's super helpful. Here's my questions. And what I really want, there were 7 or 8 questions about the data, but I really wanted to know what she thought about the data. And I wasn't sure what she was planning to bring to our session. So I thought, well, I'm feeling anxiety right now. I'll just share that anxiety with her, and I want to hear what she has to thought. So I thought, should she come prepared to our session to answer my questions about the report? Well, probably 3 hours later, I had like a 4-page email from her. And it was it was not gold, it was platinum. Like it was everything I wanted and needed to hear. Even if part of it hurt, it was clear, it was compelling, and it set the stage for, okay, I don't have any idea what she's going to ask me to do or what coaching is going to look like here, but I clearly know way too little to do this. I have to do it, and I'm impressed with the questions she's asked. I mean, I always judge a consultant by the questions they ask. That's my first yardstick I hold up. The perspectives and the insight she's offered, the practical, but in her proposal was no sense of, here are the things you're going to do. So we started, and for me, it was just blind faith of, okay, this sounds crazy to me. I don't know if she's deluded or I'm deluded, but okay, let's try it. So we started, and then brilliantly, you said, okay, now that I've moved you here, let's move the line. And you kept moving the line. And maybe about a year, and I realized she keeps moving the line. There's no arrival here. She just keeps upping the ante. But it took me a while to figure that out, which was intelligent. Because if you'd shown me where the line was at the start of a journey, I would like, this is not good. This is like asking, a person who hasn't exercised in 80 years to say, you got to bench press 500 now.
Can you talk a little bit, Ron, just so folks have a sense of what were the kinds of things that we were talking about and the kinds of things that you were doing?
So, one of your diagnostics, one of your conclusions in your data was, if your goal was to be the best kept secret in consulting, you did it brilliantly. You've masterfully done that. But she said what it took for me to find you and get to you was way too much work. You only talk to people who already know you, and there aren't that many of those. Why aren't you facing out? Why aren't you talking to others outside who don't know you? Why aren't you writing for Forbes and HBR? Why aren't you writing for these? I'm like, well, that's a novel idea. I'm sure if I called up HBR or Forbes and said, hey, I want to write for you, they're not going to talk to me. And you said, no, they won't. But if I introduce you to the editors, they might. Would you like that? And I'm like, oh, I get it. And I think within 3 weeks, I had signed a contract with Forbes, and I had my first pitch into who were all mourning the loss of Sarah from HBR. She's moved on to a different company. And I'm like, and we're off. But then, so, maybe we sat in a Harvard club, and was one of the most brilliant pieces of consulting I've ever seen. You said to me, so we're very clear, you are trying to attract higher quality clients. So the issue had been, I seemed to have this sign on the back of my shirt that said, sociopaths welcome. And I seemed to only be attracting clients from hell. And I'm like, come on, we can do better here. And frankly, I don't have that many years left in my career. I don't want to spend them with these people. Somebody should help them. People in my firm can help them. My partners, I'm happy to refer them. I don't want to spend my days on the planet with folks like this. There's the complete moron to superb leader journey. And I want to go from the great leader to the phenomenal leader, not from the, supreme moron to marginally destructive continuum. Everybody has to start their journey somewhere, and people should help those people. I'm just not that good at it. So anyway, so you said to me, tell me the story of 2 of your clients. Tell me the story of 2 people who, if you could have more clients like that, more people like them, be more in your life with them, what would it be? So I just started telling you these two stories of these two clients that I give other body parts just to have more of them. And you're taking feverish notes, and I'm meta-process going, oh, good consultant, she's taking good notes. That's good. And I babbled for probably the better part of an hour, these two stories. You asked me some detailed questions. And then you turned your laptop around and you said, here's your 12-month editorial calendar for Forbes. And I'm like, what? Wait, what? What is that? What are you even typing? And you were taking my stories and translating them into, so for example, one CEO we work with, very large consumer products company on the East Coast, left as CEO there, went to the CEO on the West Coast to a very different consumer products, but that was about it. It was owned by private equity, owned by KKR was one of them. It was a vicious, ruthless environment. This was a deeply principled man, very caring man, and he had arrived, talk about intergalactic transport. He really was out of his depth with this group, and had a leadership team that really was very opposed, had opposing values to his. And so one of your titles was how to lead a team that doesn't share your values. And these were all just translations of things I had to consult through to blog titles. Things I could probably write in my sleep would have never in a 1,000 years occurred to me to write. And you said, if you want more people like them to find you, you have to write about the things they find helpful and show that you have a point of view that you can help them with. And of course, right above the Harvard Club was a big club that said, duh, in it. But it would no more have occurred to me to think like that than the Man in the Moon. So then 3 or 4 months in, you said to me, so tell me who the people are in your field that you admire. Tell me the people who've done really work that has influenced you, that you want to emulate, that you feel like they really represent the platinum standard of influence in your field. And my first response was, well, I think most of the people who do what I do a lot of them are hacks. So I don't know that there are that many. She said, okay, well, seriously, what are the books you've read? And I have no idea why you're asking me this question. So I just assume there'll be some coaching lesson on it. So I'm like, I don't know. So I wrote my friend Jared at my firm, one of the partners, I said, who do I like? What are the books that you've heard me say that are good? And he sent back a list of books that both I liked, but also he liked. And I think there were 7, I think. Maybe there were 15 or so, but I whittled it down to 7. I thought, okay, these are people, if I were compared to these people, I'd be okay with that. And you said, these are great people. I want you to call them up and interview them for your Forbes column. I'm like, what? Now you've really lost your mind. Daniel Kahneman was on the list.
You were very skeptical.
Jonathan, I was skeptical. I was like, at this point, can I get my money back? I think I was silent for a few minutes. You said, just call. I said, what do you mean call them up? She goes, they all have websites. Go on their websites, fill out the contact form, tell them who you are, tell me you want to chat. And I'm like, what do I even say? So you typed out a little, here's the message, cut and paste. And I think, by this point, I think, I'm going to embarrass myself, right? This is going to, anyway. Of the 7 I first chatted with, including Daniel Kahneman,
Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman, just FYI, for folks who are not familiar with him.
Jonathan Haidt, Susan Cain, some really thoughtful people all said yes. That's the one. And so I get on the phone, so there I am at Christmas time, probably 3 years ago this month, on having gotten an email from, he goes by Danny. His opening line to me was, I have no idea how you got me to say yes to this. I usually turn these down. And I joke, I said, is it because you're 83 and think we don't want to hear what you have to say? Because we do. And we had a good laugh, and I had the most amazing, I was like a little boy, had the most amazing conversation with him, and it was one of the most thrilling interviews to write up as an article. Jonathan Haidt, Righteous Mind was just at its peak then. I'm now on Jonathan's advisory board, and we're good friends because of that interview. So, but if you had said to me, here's how this is going to go this year, and said that, and you're going to interview these people, and then they're going to, I would have thought, I have to go. I don't know what pills you're taking. I like to have some of them, but it's not going to, you're making this up as you go. But it's turned out that at every given point, when the bar has raised and when you're asking me to leap a 10-foot chasm and 2 5-foot jumps, that doesn't work. There I am leaping. So, but at every point, it just required a huge leap of faith.
Yeah, it's really amazing, Ron. I mean, to watch what you have done and what you've built for yourself in terms of your brand and your social proof over the past 3 years has been exceptional. And there have been a lot of ancillary benefits that have come out of it. I mean, Ron has become such a valued Harvard Business Review contributor that they've asked him to do one of their Facebook Live sessions, which gets a huge amount of viewership. That's been seen multiple hundreds of thousands of times. That Harvard Business Review has put that out. You've gotten business inquiries as a result of people contacting you and finding you through, even contracts through the pieces that you've written. I guess a question that I have for you, Ron, now that you're 3 years into it, you have some perspective on these early days. What do you feel like, just super high level, we'll get more granular, but as you look back on it, what do you think the biggest lesson or the biggest lessons are that you've learned looking back on this journey?
I think, gosh, there are so many. I think more than half the battle was an emotional one. I think the trench warfare happening in our heads, every imposter syndrome trigger, every version of self-doubt, every level of vulnerability and self-contempt that you could possibly manufacture in your head is going to come screaming to the forefront at every step of the phase. And I don't know that ever ends. What we do is personal, right? This is not just business. This is taking pieces of our soul that are sacred to us, that are unique to us, that are part of our DNA fabric, and putting it out there for the world to critique, judge, ignore, not see, compare inappropriately, consume in ways we didn't intend. And that's what this is, right? That's what, if you're going to be a thought leader and want your ideas to change the world, you have to get really clear on why, toward what end. Now, we all have professional and commercial and business motivations for this, but it has to be more than that. You have to know what you're measuring. I think if you're not clear on what your desire for impact is, and how does your ideation, what is your philosophy of personal agency? Because this is a huge exercise in personal agency definition. And if you're not clear on what that is, it will define you, and you might not like how it does that. And it will keep changing the definition of you, and you'll start measuring the wrong things, like Forbes page views or something really capricious like that. Certainly measuring our reach in some reasonable way is important, but measuring our impact and measuring the fact that we helped somebody one day we didn't expect to help. I think you have to have your own emotional metrics in check, right? So what degree of our personal satisfaction with the work matters? What will we do when our imposter syndrome flares or our self-doubt, completely explodes within us? And how will we avoid the trap of comparison? It's, I'm sitting here as we talk. I mean, part of what got me to initiate this conversation with Dorie was one of your posts in the thread. One of you was kind and generous enough to share your vulnerable moment that day where you were feeling a lot of self-doubt and had questions about your own impact. And I thought, oh my God, I know what that feels like. And it wasn't occurring to me to think that, well, I have something to offer her. I just wanted to empathize with you because it's just such a painful moment. But I think it doesn't end. I don't think there's a place you get to where you realize, okay, now I've arrived. I have a platform that's sufficiently whatever, and so therefore I can rest on my laurels and not feel these things anymore. If you're going to birth ideas worth sharing and ideas worth, that aren't just Me Too ideas that others, have proliferated before. I loved your quote this morning, Dorie, in your podcast about I want to be in a world where the best ideas prevail, not the loudest ones. Well, don't we all? But there's some loud ones out there that are definitely loud and definitely vanilla. They're Me Too. They've been repurposed and regurgitated 100 times in the last 20 years, but they're being consumed as if they're brand new. So if you're going to want to stretch yourself to the place where you're offering provocative, thought-enlightening, sometimes even controversial ideas, the emotional part of it doesn't go away. The emotional cost of that doesn't go away. I remember when I first came to Seattle, I was doing 2 full-time jobs. I was running a graduate school and running a consulting firm. Don't ask, it's a different story, but it was crazy 5 years. But during those 5 years where I was exhausted, and by the way, running a grad school, turns out knowing a lot about organizations doesn't make you qualified to run one. And so I wasn't that good at it. I was having to get it accredited and having to do a lot of things for the school to move along. But it was a hard 5 years. And one of the guys who was my student then became we employed him at Navalent. He's now one of our partners here. But I was really at a very discouraged moment about, just wanted to throw a towel in and go like buy a restaurant in Montana and just end. And he looked at me and said, "That's just so not your story. Quitting is just not your story." I said, "I think about quitting all the time." He said, "Thinking about quitting and quitting are 2 very different things." He said, "You can't call it perseverance if you don't think about quitting." And it was a really important moment to me to recognize that just because having perseverance doesn't mean, like having courage isn't the absence of fear, right? It's just taking action in the face of the fear. Having perseverance doesn't mean you forge ahead with great confidence all the time. In fact, most of the time you don't. You put that idea out there, you get on that podcast interview, you send in that submission or that pitch, and it's all to do to stay composed emotionally for the rest of the day. And I think what I'm coming to learn is that that's just part of a deal. It's not as if you get to some place where those muscles are suddenly well developed. I think there's a place where you're not maybe as undone by unfair critique or a weird comparison or your own self-contemptuous voices in your head. At Navalent, we have a really gross term. We call it disasterbating. When people just obsessively catastrophize over something. And as thought leaders, our proclivity to disasterbate over our own work and others' consumption of it or others' views of it is wildly irrational. But it's what we do, right? So it doesn't matter that it's irrational. It's what we do. And I think learning to just regulate and take a breath and recognize when those irrational thoughts have spun hypervigilance out of control, and recognize that every step of your journey is not a defining one. It's the journey that's defining. No one article, no one book, no one podcast interview, no one TED Talk, no one anything is going to define you or your agency in the world. And if you let it, or if I let it, it's only defining, but to me, no one else really cares. And so, having to shift from letting those be metrics of some kind to letting them be evidence of my own journey and evidence of my contribution to the world. What has been a difficult but important lesson to managing the emotional part of it. I don't know that I've mastered that lesson by any sense. I think I'm just starting to recognize that it's just part of a deal.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Ron. I just want to share some of the comments that are coming in. Lisa says, so grateful for the candor. Anne says, I appreciate the openness and the honesty about the fear and the steps needed to overcome it. And Rich said that really resonated with me. Emotional and self-doubt must be overcome. So thanks. It's really connecting with people. I wanted to start out with a question that Jennifer actually asked. She said, I love your term, Ron. I was in the wrong galaxy. So she wants to know, how do you know when you're in the wrong galaxy? And do you think that you would have eventually figured that out on your own? Or like, how does one know?
Well, I can answer the second one much easier, Jennifer. Never in 100 million years would it have occurred to me to do any of what I've done, ever. I get it now. I get, how echo chambers expand, and I have found my own sort of formula for how I want to amplify my voice. But it would have, I can't even tell you. We all feel late to the party, right? It doesn't matter how old we are. We all feel late to the party. I'm now coming to realize that that's an advantage. Being later to the party means I have more years of experience to draw from. And so I've decided, an old boss used to say to me, if you can't fix it, feature it. And so I can't make myself younger, but I can make myself wiser to the world. I think the right galaxy is partly it's, there's the pragmatic reality of why did I do this in the first place? I wanted to attract people who inspired me. I want to work with clients that inspire me. I don't want to work with clients who I'm just trying to make them less abusive to their people. Well, some of those leaders are starting to find me now, and I'm being more accessible to them. So that's one swim lane metric. But I think the other part of it is I now look at this body of work, I laugh. I'm like, really? How'd that happen? But I think it's impact. Whenever someone says to me, that article, that talk, that video, that interview on the podcast really impacted me in a personal way, or I'm like the other day. I was actually with Dorie when it happened. I did a piece on HBR that talked about how consultants have their favorite shtick. They just, it's the hammer and nail syndrome. I have my favorite instrument. It solves everything. And somebody in one of the comments quoted the piece, that section of the article, and said, this made me hang my head in shame. We have to have better solutions and be more thoughtful for our clients and not just perpetuate shtick. I thought, well, you know what, for someone to write that on an HBR, in front of 5 million people, to admit that they've been convicted by a higher standard. What's the price tag you put on that, right? I don't, and so for me, that's okay, now I'm at least, I may not be in the right orbit, but at least I'm in the right galaxy now, because I'm talking to people who care about what I want to say.
Yeah, your work is really making an impact in that way. One great thing about Ron's work, his very first year writing for HBR, one of his pieces became one of the top 10 most read pieces of the entire year that year. It was really stunning.
And do you think I was ready for that? Not even a clue, right? This was research I spent 10 years on, right? It was the foundational research for my last book, right? I was skiing in Canada the day it posted. And suddenly I'm hearing these it was like a wind chime. It was my Twitter blowing up. Messages from all over the world. Will you come and speak? Do you think I got any of them? No. I didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. My firm did not know what to do. We weren't prepared. We had no social media support. So here's this
ready now.
Yeah, different now. But at the moment in 2016, I was so flat-footed. He was the opportunity of a lifetime, right? And I had no idea what to do. And I'm going, Dorie, what do I do? What do I do? Answer them all. I'm like, with what? Thank you so much for your, every Twitter, every LinkedIn. It was just, and our editor at HBR was like, we're all sitting here watching this going, we don't believe it either. And then of course, like all good kind of just fades into the whatever. And a year later, I found like 9 Facebook messages buried in the, when you're not friends with somebody, Facebook buries the message somewhere like 9 levels deep and you never get it. Well, like 9 invitations to come and speak at places buried somewhere. Our website couldn't handle the inquiry. It was terrible. It was a wonderful moment, So yeah, the
speaks to the importance of a holistic approach. There's a lot of pieces you have to begin to put together.
Yeah, preferably before they needed. Not as a result of realizing we needed them, didn't have them. But
yeah, absolutely.
To help you move on.
Ron has plugged those leaks now. That's for sure.
Sometimes with duct tape, and they'll it's not great plugs, but at least they're holding.
Absolutely. So I want to weigh in for a second. A question came in, and there's a little bit of discussion in the chat box about Forbes Coaches Council. And so just to explain that, Jerry had written in and said that he's a member of that as kind of a way of getting social proof. Just to explain in case anybody wants to know. So Forbes Coaches Council is a paid offering that Forbes does, in which you put several $1,000s in, and then are able to write regularly for Forbes. So I would say there's pros and cons. The way that that Ron is doing it, I used to write for Forbes as well. We came in sort of through the journalism route, as it were. So there's no payment involved. In fact, if you write frequently enough, you will get paid for that contribution. It's like a lot of things, right? It's, the people who are sort of in the know are aware that it's a paid situation. And so it may be, it's not from a branding perspective as great as coming in and being able to do it organically. However, the truth is most people are not necessarily aware of the distinction, and it gives you the opportunity to be able to write pieces for Forbes and interview people and say, hey, I write for Forbes, it's going to be in Forbes, which does have some value. So whether it's that or something else, the question really just becomes, okay, it's a chunk of money. What else would you be doing with the money? What's sort of the alternatives and the opportunity costs there? So I hope that that's helpful. So I want to get
how much is the fee?
Right. It used to be maybe $1,500. Now it's I think more. Yeah.
It was I believe I paid $1,500, and then there was like an initiation fee. So I'm thinking it was somewhere about $2,000. And my experience was exactly kind of what Dorie said. It's like it made me write, because I put up the money, it made me write more than I would have, because now I put the money out. So I'm like, okay, I got to use this thing, got to write. So that was helpful. I was unsure about how it's being perceived, and Dorie, I think you answered that. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Got it. Absolutely. Thanks very much. So just want to get to some of the other questions. I'll do one more right now from the chat box. Feel free, people who are live, to do it. And we will then, I'll go to some of the ones that came in earlier to make sure that we get those folks. So Jim wants to know, Ron, did you have a plan B in the event that Forbes foolishly turned you down?
Well, so I was more worried about HBR. So the interesting thing about when I remember signing my contract with Forbes, thinking this was it's a big deal. It is. I now have come to realize that the contributor network is about 650 strong. So, like at the time it was just, I remember Dorie saying, I could contribute to the Huffington Post. Really? Who does it? It is becoming a more ubiquitous thing. It still has brand cachet, but you're really on your own when it comes to promotion. Their pushing of their pieces is a little bit less now, even since I started in 3 years. I didn't have a plan B for any of this. But I didn't understand why I was so naive in the first place. I do think that there are, if you really want to write for business periodicals out there are a range of places. And again, if nothing else for the social proof to say you're a contributor, I think there are probably plenty of places where a reasonably good writer and curator of ideas and content can get their pieces accepted. I don't think it's far less daunting than I thought it would be.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. So we have a question that came in from Diana. Diana lives in Hong Kong, so it's 3 o'clock in the morning for her. So she perhaps very wisely said she wanted to send her question electronically. She says, my question, of course, is what Ron wishes he knew from the start, and also what he did that wasn't useful as I try to prune activities for 2019.
Well, first of all, I'm grateful that you got up that early in the morning. So thank you for that, Diana. That's very kind of you. I wish I had known all this. I mean, years ago, I didn't. I wish I had understood that that this was all needed. Long before I turned 50. I didn't. I think the reality is that there's no silver bullets, right? I wish I had accepted emotionally that the number of followers you have on Twitter, the number of followers you have on LinkedIn, or any number of pieces. That one HBR piece notwithstanding. There's no one singular piece of this puzzle that is more additive than others or more accretive than others. Certainly, sure, HBR as a brand recognition and that the fact that they have 5 million followers, it doesn't hurt. But the reality is that any number of these pathways, it's their combined value to an echo chamber, to a brand platform, or to the impact of it. That it's how they work, how you work them in concert. would be the most important lesson, to stop trying to pull all the levers extra hard. The second one is, oh my gosh, we all need help. We all need help. So I would say if there are activities like right now, with the thanks of Dorie, I've outsourced a good chunk of my social media, I've done probably over 200 podcasts I've been a guest on in only 2 years. So just when I thought I was starting to get the choke on 2 Forbes and 2 HBR pieces a month, and I'm like barely catching up. Dorie's like, great, this year we're going to add podcasting. And I'm like, what's it going to replace? Nothing, we're just going to add it. Wow.
You've been very assiduous, Ron.
Panting, like whatever. So anyway, I don't do any of that work. The person who books those for me, gets those set up for me, I just show up, do the interview, and then she promotes them along with me. Having great help. I don't know how I get there are practical implications for that, but I would certainly encourage you, any place in the body of activities that is not either in your sweet spot or not necessary that you do, get help. Because otherwise you have a dilution factor. When we work with our clients, when we do organization design work, we bucket up the work of their enterprise into 3 different categories of work: competitive work, competitive enabling work, and necessary work. And competitive work is the work that if you put $1 in, $5 comes in the door. It's the really sweet spot of what you do. For me, that's my consulting work. It's not my thought leadership work, right? Competitive enabling work is all the work that supports that. And that for me is my content creation, right? So I don't make my living as a thought leader. I make my living because I'm a thought leader. And then there's about 60% of everything you do is just necessary. Keeps you out of jail, keeps you in compliance, keeps the lights on. You don't have to do it better than anybody else because you know who's going to pay you for it. And somewhere in that body of activities, especially if you're a solopreneur, first of all, one of the things I've said on a lot of entrepreneurial podcasts is there's really no such thing as a solopreneur, right? You never do this. You have a team. Someone does your website. Someone does your dry cleaning. People do things for you, and you just see that as your team, right? But for any of the bodies of activities in that enabling or necessary work that you don't have to do, find someone else to do, because you really want to be spending as much of your time as you can on the very sweet spot of being competitive and distinct.
Yeah,
and I wish I'd asked for help. Competent help. That is a really important qualifier. Competent help. Years and years earlier.
Yeah, that's so important, Ron. Thank you. So a couple of people have just chimed in the chat. Ron, you've been on Caroline's podcast and Jim's podcast, and they both say you were a great guest. And Amy had a follow-up. She just wanted to know quickly, how much prep do you do for a podcast?
I think part of the bigger answer is, there are so many versions of your voice, right? There are so many versions of your voice in writing, your voice in long-term writing, your voice in someone else's writing, your voice in an interview, your voice in a video. And I think none of our voices sound the same in any one of those versions. So I think finding a great version of your voice and knowing where your voice really is, it's at its most tuned, is important. And sometimes we don't know that. And so I think experimenting to find out is important. For me, podcasting became a really practical and useful tool because I spent a lot of time public speaking and being interviewed before this, had a lot of media training. So it wasn't hard for me to step into that medium. I think the preparation question is a really important one. For me, it depends on how much preparation the interviewer has done. So I think there are 3 categories of podcasts. I've now, after 200 of them, have figured out. There's the really premium podcast with great interviewers who do a great job and they're really worth your time. There are really, really nice people podcasting who don't have a big following, but they're decent interviewers, or they're great interviewers, but just haven't found their following yet, and they're enjoyable to meet. And then there's a waste of your time. This morning, I did a podcast. I think he has actually a pretty big following too. Complete waste of my time. He got on a podcast. It's going to be a 5-minute interview. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. And this is exactly how the questions sound. So, Ron, what piece of advice do you think you have? Okay, great. Next question. Okay, if you could go back to your younger self, it's like they all went to the same podcast school. I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this, right? And so at this point in my career, I don't get to choose, so I don't always get to know which one they're going to be. But when I get an email in advance of a podcast, like I did yesterday for what I'm doing 7 this week. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how that happened. This guy did a whole show. He'd done his homework. He said, I want to talk about, and he wrote out a script and put questions in. I'm like, okay, this guy came to play. I'm gonna step up and play, right? So I might type out some notes. I might bring up some other content on the screen. If it's gonna be a video one, you got to sort of cheat. Part of the thing is having your stump speech, having your 10 stock stories, your 4 stock. I mean, they all ask the same questions, right? And so having a set of answers, I think I'm at this place now where even I'm bored hearing some of the same stories. I'm told I need to put a new batch of stories. But I think having a repertoire of content that's good for, short or long interviews. Caroline is a phenomenal interviewer. She is, people who are great conversationalists, the ones to be careful of, and Caroline's not one of them. She did a phenomenal job. But there's some who say, I don't like to prepare for these. I just like to sort of go with it and make it just a good chat, which is usually code for they're going to wing it and they're going to ask stupid questions. Or they really are a great conversationalist, and they really make it very engaging for the listeners. The thing to do is to go see how many episodes they've done. Because if you're episode 4, might want to be concerned to do some preparation. If episode 90, you're probably good to go. But so for me, the preparation is all about what's the topic, what's the content. Now I think the woman, Marie, who books me, we found the sort of 3 or 4. These are the 3 or 4 areas to focus on.
This is Marie and Contrera, who's a member of our recognized expert community as well.
Yep, and hire her. She's really awesome. So anyway, yeah, it's the nice thing about it is, after the hour is done, you're done, right? I have a tremendous respect for people who are committed to making, being a podcast host and making their own show. I've helped a lot of people places where I volunteer here in Seattle. I've helped launch a couple of podcasts, and to be really committed to that and really committed to building, that's a lot of work. Now, if you do it well and you hit the right niche, it's a phenomenal way to curate ideas and content. But being the guest on them is much easier than being the host.
Very true. So Ron, Jennifer had a question. She wants to know, based on your story about kind of getting overwhelmed with the success of your HBR piece, she says, what pieces should you have in place prior to embarking on publishing in various, articles in various outlets in the event that we're fortunate enough to have that type of recognition so that we don't miss out on opportunities? What would you recommend?
Great question, Jennifer. I think part of what's valuable is if you have a stable of material to draw from. I think, I ran a writing studio here in Seattle for about 3 years for first-time authors. So it wasn't how to write studio, it was how to build a book. Because most first-time book writers don't understand that a book is built, it's not written. One of the things they would complain about is I have writer's block. And I'm like, you know what? There's actually really no such thing as writer's block. Because if you sit down in front of a white screen and what you feel so compelled to say isn't pouring out of you, you have nothing to say. Now, how to say it is a different issue, right? You can play with that. But if you have deadlines to meet, which can be great forcing functions and accountability for contributors who are on a clock, having a stable of content that you can draw from is really important, right? So like doing the edit for the first year and a half, Dorie and I would regularly use our sessions to do editorial calendars to get a stable of 5 or 6 pieces in the queue to go build, whether for Forbes or HBR. Because sometimes, that obvious how to lead a leadership team doesn't share your values. The obvious is never obvious to me. I don't see it right in front of me. So I have to sort of step back and go, okay, so now I get the drill with Dorie. Okay, what client pissed you off last week? Tell me the story. And she'll find 5 pieces in the story. But that's still a newer muscle for me. I'm getting a little better at it. But so if you can have a queue or stable in advance of pieces already written or that are in progress, I think that's really important.
Excellent. Thank you, Ron. So we have a few more questions left. This is we're entering speed round a little bit because we're coming up on the end of our hour, but I want to try to get these in if we can. Glenn had a question about email. He says, what kind of content should go to email subscribers versus being posted on a blog or some other medium? And do you have any thoughts about how frequently to email your list, especially the minimum viable frequency. What are your thoughts on that, Ron?
Dorie's chuckling because she knows. So my firm we finally outsourced a lot of that work. I do think that there has to be exclusive content. If you use MailChimp has a great set of features around campaigns you can set up so that you can dose your content in certain ways. I thought once a month was too much, and actually turns out it's too little. So most of the experts these days say twice a month is minimum, just to keep fresh and in their presence. I do think that altering your tone from a personal, so we all love getting Dorie's emails because it's like a personal note from Dorie, from a personal first person, and then from a newslettery curated set of content. I think sometimes alternating is nice. I certainly think that if your followers or your email list feels like they're getting something exclusive from you that others aren't getting, that always feels good. There's a lot of ways to package up exclusivity so it's exclusive but also purposable. Even if it's exclusive early, right? So they're going to get it 2 months before Forbes gets it. I think people always appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ron. And another question came in from Nelson. He says there's a difference between persistence and blindly following through on a plan that isn't working, but one keeps on doing it anyway. He essentially wants to know, how did you know when to be persistent and when to give up?
So I think there are signals. I think the world has a way of giving us feedback that you have to pay attention to, right? So in the middle of the year, probably early into our second year, Dorie wanted me to put a book proposal together. And I was kind of ambivalent about that, but we spent a lot of time building a really sophisticated book proposal on a topic that was important to me, that several agents told us nobody will touch this. I think it was the timing around a change of regime in Washington, and trying to go so countercultural on a view on organizations that people weren't ready to tolerate it. And I think for me that was okay, you know what? Let's not keep hammering. I don't need to keep hammering this. Enough brick prints in my forehead here. I don't need to keep doing this. And I set it aside. It turns out, 2 years later, with my own body of research now, not data that I collected from other places, that same topic turned sideways now has potentially great value, right? So I think I don't know that. I think there's 3 types of feedback the world can give you. Is yes, like this is your swim lane. Doesn't mean it'll be without resistance or that you won't be opposed. There'll be obstacles, but it's still a yes. There's a no, and then there's a no, not now, or yes, but here's a different version of it, right? I think you have to be agile enough to adapt, and I think early on in your journey, you're certainly willing to experiment. There's the delight aspect of your voice, and then there's the expert. I don't believe in I think we gave a lot of people a lot of bad advice by telling them to follow their passions, because we never told them you can't follow your passion if you suck at it and make a living at it. And so you have to have some basis of credibility and expertise with which to bring your passion. And so sometimes we don't know what that is, right? Sometimes we don't know if something we're good at is also commercially viable. We may be commercially viable, we exit at something that we hate doing. Well, so then how do you reconcile that, right? And so, make that your bread and butter work, but find other ways to find elements of your voice and your reach and your impact in the world that you love. And sometimes finding that perfect portfolio of activities, it takes a while, and it's some trial and error.
Yeah, that's helpful, Ron. Thank you. So Jennifer had a question. She says, is someone at the beginning stages of building a following, what are some key insights to keep in mind? How do you know strategically where you should start? What would be your advice for a real newcomer?
So you have partly a thought leader question, you have partly a career question there, right? So part of what I would want you to do is step back, and before even figuring out what the logistics are or the tactical aspects of your thought leadership are, is to ask yourself, in 5 years from now, when you turn whatever that birthday is, what is it you want to be true of your career or your professional world? I do a thing with my clients called Stories from the Future. And we create patterns and we create elements for them to write a set of stories from the future that give us a chance to go walk in and look back to see what are the viable pathways that could have gotten you there. And so if you haven't really architected a dream that's worth it, because at some point you're going to go, screw this is hard, right? So at some point you have to have some compelling dream out there that you're navigating toward, worth the speed bumps along the way. So I would want you to step back and really imagine your thumbprint on the world in a way that's unique to you, that you'd really be proud of and you'd really be excited about, and you'd know would satisfy you. Because then architecting a pathway toward that is a little different than just, now sometimes that doesn't mean it won't be without agile turns or detours along the way, but at least you know some sense of a destination, and that still may evolve along the way. The earlier you are in your career, the thing I get trouble sometimes when I see people in their mid-20s or even sometimes even in their early 30s is it's chasing a fad. Oh, I'm going to be on a podcast, or I'm going to do podcasts, or I'm going to have a blog, or I'm going to be a photojournalist. And it's sort of grasping at straws. But if you begin to probe on that, well, why would you do that? Then you really don't have substantial answers. So you want to be able to answer to yourself, this in the service of this, and this and why. Otherwise, I'd be reticent to make deep commitments to those things because they may end up being short-lived.
Thank you, Ron. So my last question for you, this has been such an enormously valuable session. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know people have gotten a lot out of it. My last question for you is now, 3+ years into your recognized expert journey. How is your life different today than it was 3 years ago? There's been ups and downs, but what do you feel is different, or what do you feel you've gained from having engaged in this process?
A lot of new friends here, which is, I think, a really important part. This is, creativity. If you look at the back of the Latin roots of the word creativity, it's a social experience. Creating is social. It's not intellectual. It's not cognitive. And I think that knowing that you have people who have your back, knowing that you have friends and colleagues you can call and bitch to when someone says something stupid on your blog is helpful. It's important, having help. I think, you never feel done, right? You never feel like there's, what to do with my discontent, right? In one of our very first sessions to me, and I told you how we're going to manage my own proclivity toward discontent. You said, that's the nature of ambitious people, Ron. That's how shit gets done in the world. But when you aim your discontent inwardly and it becomes a weapon, you weaponize your discontent. That's not so good, right? And so I think learning that discontent and dissatisfaction are different things, and allowing your discontent to be a propulsion mechanism, but not allowing your dissatisfaction to be one of a joy-draining thing. I think my life is different because I know the difference. I don't know that I always live the difference, but I know the difference. So I think, finding, I'm still looking for that ideal swim lane. I think thought leadership is a lifestyle, right? It's not a destination. It's not just a platform, right? It's a much bigger means to an end in our life, in our agency in the world. And I think I was too utilitarian in my views early on about this just being a pragmatic means to an end versus a lifestyle. And I think there's two words, recognized and expert. And with recognition comes a lot of responsibility and a lot of crap. And with expertise comes a lot of sense of you can't be static, right? Expertise is not a thing that stops. It's a constantly evolving thing. So you put those two words together, a recognized expert, and you have a lot of agility required to always be not information, but in formation. And to allow yourself to always be in mitosis can be unpleasant, but I now get it's just part of a deal.
Yeah, I think your answer is really powerful, Ron, and really telling. I think it sort of sums up the conversation perfectly, actually, because, the important thing to keep in mind, I mean, guys, Ron has written 110 articles for Forbes and the Harvard Business Review. His talks have been seen literally by hundreds of thousands of people. And that objectively is something really impressive. It is something that I'm impressed with, and I think is an enormous step forward. And yet for all of us along the recognized expert journey, a lot of what we feel is, oh, but that next thing, or oh, but it's not quite enough. We keep sort of striving, and that's the nature of the tension, is recognizing that it is awesome, and yet sometimes internally there's still doubts, there's still questions, it's still a process. And so if you feel at any point along your journey, whether you're just starting or you're kind of in that, messy middle, or even if you've achieved a level of success that maybe, a few years ago you would have looked at and said, oh my God, I wish I could be like that. You internally will probably still have questions or concerns, or, wonder, is it enough, or am I doing the right thing? It's all part of it. But as Ron said, it is a lifestyle. It's a process of learning to get comfortable sharing your ideas, putting yourself out there in such a way so that great things can come to you, and so that we can really support each other and create a community and share our ideas in such a way that they're actually making a difference. So Ron, thank you so much. This has been amazing. We are all really appreciative. All the feedback is coming in. Rich says, great session. Ellen says, Ron is an awesome speaker. Marcy says, this has been so valuable. So thank you. If people want to connect with you, learn more about you, Ron, where should we send them?
Absolutely. I'll put it in the chat box here. Thank you all for all your generous comments. I appreciate it. That's our website there, and then my email there. So
there we go. So navolent.com is your firm, and that's the best way to find your articles and your information.
Yep, absolutely. Guys, have a wonderful holiday season. Keep up the great work. I'll look forward to seeing you all on Facebook, and keep generating those ideas. The world needs them.
Thank you so much, Ron. Yay, recognized expert community. Take care. Happy holidays, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.